Hey guys, back Kentucky Range Time, back with another episode of our 300 Blackout Ballistic Gel Block Test. And today I'm running another, say a rather large grain weight bullet that came out of the same era as that nozzle repetition bullet did when 30 caliber bullets were next to impossible to find. And, you know, guys that were loading 300 blackout early on at one point in time were pretty much just loading whatever 30 caliber bullet they could find, and that included me. And I've got several of these left in ever shrinking quantities, but I do have several of these left that I've had stored back in ammo cans for several years now. And the bullet today is the Hornady 180 grain SST. Now, SST stands for super shock tip, and this bullet is designed for whitetail and, you know, most North American game up to including moose. So this is a bonded bullet, and the copper is actually thicker around the cantilever, and another interlocking ring of copper set deeper into the lead here around the back of the cup. And that's interesting because you're going to see the results in the ballistic gel block here in a few minutes. So so stay tuned for that. Now, this bullet is loaded quite a bit shorter in my 300 blackout. It's not anywhere close to being seated to the cantilever like it would be in a 308 or a 3 Win Mag or some of the other larger 30 caliber rifles. But it functions pretty well in 300 blackout at that seating depth. So let's turn around here and take a look at the loading, and then we'll move on into the gel block test coming right up. All right, guys. So one more note to keep in mind throughout this video is I had misidentified these. These are in a Ziploc baggie in an ammo can when I dug them back out, and they actually are 180 grain SSTs, and I have proved that now with firing the bullets and pulling one and actually weighing it out of the loaded round. But initially, I mistook these for 175 grain AMAX, and so, you know, forgive me for that. Every time you hear me say 175 grain AMAX, just erase that away and know that it's actually a 180 grain SST. And I'll also show you a little bit of ID in these bullets here in a few minutes too, once we get turned around. All right, guys, so here's our loading. You know, you're used to seeing this now. CCI small rifle primers, number 400. Accurate 1680 is another one of the powders I use quite a bit. And like I said, these have been loaded up for 10 or 12 years or longer, and I no longer have a box for those. So here's my little note tag labeling this out. This is to make it easy to see when I'm doing the video. And here's a quick look at the loaded round. So you heard me mention earlier that these are short seated to the cantilever, and here's a look at where the cantilever falls on the neck, on top of the neck. And you can see that this bullet actually extends down past the neck into the case with the boat tail, probably 1/4 of an inch. So, you know, there's still plenty of that bullet down in the case and still plenty of it sticking out. So, all right. So now let's go back to bullet ID here. So I've got the Hornady manual out here, and I don't know if you guys knew this or not, but the bullets in the pictures in the Hornady manual are to scale. So if you take a real bullet and you lay it out on the picture, it is a perfect fit. Length, width. I mean, you know, don't know if you guys know that or not. It's something I discovered a while back. But when you pick up a bullet and you don't know exactly what it is, well, you can go weigh it on your scale, get the grain weight, and then you can come in here. As you can see, there's not a huge amount of 180 grains to pick from. And, you know, that just happens to be the one that matches it. So ballistic tip, cantilever, 180 grain SST, and there's actually the item part number. So you can go to Hornady and reorder those if you wanted to. But anyway, that's the quick reloading tip for the day. I may end up doing a little short separate video on this a little bit later and demonstrate this with several different bullets. So, all right, let's move on to the gel blocks. All right, guys, next up is the Hornady 175 grain AMAX, and this is a ballistic tip bullet. and this should be a subsonic or supersonic loading. And again, I'm going to run this out of the CVA Scout. Hopefully we will have a little bit better luck of getting a catch than we did with the nozzle partition. And I'm expecting a little bit of fragmentation out of this one, or at least a little bit of expansion with this ballistic tip. All right, 1777 on the velocity. Guys, so here we got a wound track starting. I see some red ballistic tip. There's a fragment, so we did get some expansion, more fragments here, more fragments, more fragments, more fragments, and holy cow, we got a catch on the plate at 32 inches. So that's pretty cool. All right, let's go back and do another one. All right, 175 grain A-Max, shot 2. We got expansion on the last one. We got good fragmentation throughout the wound cavity, and we actually got a catch on the steel plate at the back at 32 inches of penetration. So this is pretty interesting here. All right, 2 for 2 on the Garmin. Let's go see if we got another catch. All right, guys, so we got wound track 2 just in front of the other one. There's a ballistic tip. We've got the bullet going end over end, still flipping end over end, and exiting out the top right about here. So let's go do one more of these and see if we can get another catch. All right, guys, Hornady A-Max 175 grain, shot number 3. We got velocity on the Garmin. Let's go see if we got a catch in the block. The entry was back here behind the second shot. And right here, we've got it rotating, breaking apart, fragments of copper, fragments of lead, more copper, more copper, more copper. And hey, so we actually got a dual wound track here. So it looks like the lead completely disengaged from the copper jacket. Fragments of copper, copper and lead, big chunk of lead here, but down here is more copper jacketing, and here is a chunk of lead, or chunk of the cup, the copper cup from the bullet. So at some point when this bullet was rotating in this area right here, the lead separated from the copper jacketing. The lead created one wound path of its own, and the copper cup itself actually kept on going and created a second wound track by itself. So lots of pieces and parts in here. All right, real quick before we dig these out of here, let's look at our penetration. So we were getting expansion and loss of the ballistic tip at around 7 inches with all 3 rounds. We were getting fragmentation starting around the 9 and the 10 inch round. We were getting prolific fragments at 14 inches plus. And like I said, we had this one stopped after it separated. Of course, it split the mass. So half the energy went with one piece, half the energy went with the other piece. And we still have 22 inches with both pieces. Like I said before, the second round went the full 32 inches and would have exited the block if not for hitting the steel plates and the backer that I've got set up here. And the second round exited out the top at about 27 inches. So this is good penetration performance and fragmentation. This bullet actually seemed to do really well. as far as opening up and leaving some fragments. The second one actually, I guess, did good, depending on what you're looking for. 22 inches and that much, even shedding that much weight through 22 inches is still pretty good penetration. So, all right, guys. So here's the aftermath of these 180 grain SSTs that I dug out of the gel block. All three of the polymer tips, the very tip end of all three polymer tips, broke off, and those were in the block there, fairly close to the front. The rest of the polymer tip for the two that stayed in were also on the block. Of course, the third bullet you can actually see up in the intro if you go back and watch that. That massive cavitation, that temporary wound cavities that bullet went through, but then you can actually see that bullet in two frames exiting the top of the gel block, moving over to the top right hand corner of the screen. So if you missed that, go back and take a look at that. You get a pretty good profile of that bullet as it goes out sideways. So that was the second round. This was the first round. This is the round that went all the way back and landed on the steel plates. Literally laying sideways against the steel plates at 32 inches of gel block penetration. And then this was the last round, and this is the one that separated. So if you look inside the copper cup here, and get it stood up, you can see down in there's actually a ring in the copper where the copper is thicker. It's kind of like a wedge shaped, and it's meant to lock the lead into the base of these bullets. And if you look at this line right here on the base of this bullet, everything below that is a little bit smaller diameter. So what's happened is the centrifugal force of this bullet yawing and spinning has actually swaged that lead up out of that cup and separated the two, generating those dual wound tracks. Now, if you roll this piece over here and look, you can see that the copper sheared off of this right around the cantilever. Right there, you can see it just kind of matches itself up. So lots of big fragments out of that third round, and it's pretty neat how you can go back and kind of reassemble some of these pieces and parts that you're digging out of here. This is actually the ring here where the cantilever was at. So this would have been the tip of the bullet. So the initial opening up and the initial expansion happened on the end of the bullet, and then as it started rotating, it just sheared the lead out of that copper cup there. So anyway, pretty neat. Lots of big pieces of copper here, lots of big chunks of lead, lots of little bleeders in this round going opposite direction. So all right, guys, so there you go. That's the Hornady 180 grain SST Super Shock Tip in a 300 blackout loading. And so Hornady designs this bullet to be ran at 2,200 foot per second and faster to get optimal expansion. And out of the big, the 308 Winchester, 30-06, 300 Win Mag, out of these bigger calibers, at the velocities this bullet was designed to, then it actually mushrooms up pretty good. Now, we basically were running a little over 1,700 foot per second, and we had enough energy in there to blow this tip out and peel the copper back, but not really enough to drive that bullet on down there and keep compressing that lead and form that big mushroom head. So that's what you give up running this bullet in 300 blackout. Now, you do keep a nice big chunk. You're going to get some deeper penetration because you're not blowing that head out to over a ½ inch like the bigger calibers could. But that's why you pick the bullet that has the characteristics you want to load for what you're intending on using it for. So anyway, like I said, this bullet was an older loading when I couldn't find anything else to load in 300 blackout. So, and one other note, I failed to mention it when we were looking at the loading earlier, but this is a piece of the original Remington brass When 300 Blackout first came out, Remington was the only company making 300 Blackout factory ammo. They made a 220 grain Sierra Match King loading for subsonic round, and they used a 110 grain bullet, and I'm not sure who made it, but they used a 110 grain bullet for supersonic loading. And they had a really long 300 Blackout profile ogive on it. And so this was some of the original 300 Blackout brass I bought. I think I had a total of like 120 rounds of that when I first bought my 300 Blackout upper. So it's RP head stamp, 300 Blackout, and from the time that this was loaded 10 to 12 years ago, that was it. They were the only people making 300 Blackouts, or 300 Blackout stamped brass. It was all coming from Remington. So anyway, just a nice little add-on there. So, okay, guys, let's get this wrapped up. Map Kentucky Range Time. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe button. And as always, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'd be glad to hear any comments you've got on this bullet or on the loading or anything in general. I mean, I'll talk about just about anything. So anyway, guys, again, thanks, and we'll catch you on the next one.